I would like to talk to you about foundations, the base underneath all buildings. My work involves building big buildings, like this one in Amsterdam and this one in Rotterdam. Developing these kind of buildings from a private company like mine is not easy. It takes years and we need a lot of persistence. And as you can imagine, being a woman in this very male-dominated world can be a challenge as well. I sometimes feel like a professional fixer. Through my life, I learned to fix everything in one way or the other, and I hardly take no for an answer. However, my biggest challenge in life was not fixing, and is not fixing these buildings, but has been fixing myself. As I said in the beginning, I would like to talk about foundations. So let me share with you how I built my own. And as this is a story I've never told before, sorry, I'm really nervous. When I was 13, I was a happy, long-haired girl going to school here in Amsterdam. A typical teenager. But then I felt a lump in my left chin. The doctors operated it out, and a couple of weeks later, we learned I had Hodgkin disease. Right, never heard of. It wasn't the days of Google, and my doctor also explicitly told me to not look it up in the encyclopedia. However, I did feel it was very serious. And yes, it was indeed the beginning of a horrendous year. The chemotherapy made me very ill. I lost my hair. I needed blood transfusions, and thinking of it, I felt like I was throwing up for a year. I will never forget the evening in the hospital when I was speaking to the girl in the bed next to mine. She had bone cancer. And when she asked what I had, I replied, well, I have Hodgkin's disease. And she then said, well, so you have cancer as well. My world stood still that evening. Of course, I knew what cancer was. My beloved grandmother was dying of cancer in those days. But nobody had told me that Hodgkin's disease is actually cancer as well. Cancer of the lymph system. And of course, my parents had meant only well, but by not telling me, they made me suspicious ever since. My only defense in those days was to bury myself in my schoolwork, ignoring my fears, and working very hard from the hospital to keep up with my class, despite not being able to go to school for an entire year. And although I was very ill, I tried not to become part of the hospital. I asked the nursing staff to take my bed and roll it in the bathroom of the children's department, and that's where I slept and stayed, because my logic in those days was, when I'm not part of the big sick room, I'm not ill like the rest. That was the beginning of my foundation, and that's how I became a fixer. When I was 21 and a student in Groningen, I felt another lump in my left groin. I had an operation again, and I needed radiation therapy this time. After a couple of months, as you may know by now, I went back to Groningen as soon as possible. But then 2 years later, Hodgkin returned for the third time. I needed radiation therapy again, but another problem occurred now. The left ovary had already been damaged by the earlier radiation, so I had a big choice to make. If I ever wanted to have children, which I wanted badly, I needed my right ovary to be taken out of the radiation field. That was a major surgery in those days, but I had it, of course I had it. Through all of this, I finished my studies, I got this great job with an international firm, I traveled the world. My job actually involved troubleshooting, so that was really my thing. But to the outside world, I had it all together. I had beaten my diseases and I was carrying on with life as usual. But as we know, what is on the outside isn't always the truth. I lived in fear every single day. The last blow in my face was learning that despite the surgery to save my ovary, the previous treatments had already permanently damaged my hormone levels. My level was actually indicating that my reproductive system was at menopause. I was 26 years old and I was told I would never be able to have children. At that moment in my life, I felt so swallowed up by darkness and completely disconnected from my environment and the people I loved. I was really angry too. I hated my body since it had failed me so badly. For a year, I went to the bathroom almost every hour of the day, wherever I was, checking my lymph nodes for lumps. And I went to see my doctor in the hospital almost every month, feeling something somewhere. And he did his checks again and again and tried to convince me I was okay. But I didn't believe him. And then one day he said, Monique, you can really not go on like this. You need help. You need to see a psychologist. Well, it was another blow in my face, because in my family, we didn't do psychologists. And well, my foundation of life in those days was constantly working, hiding my fears, being dishonest with myself, and hating my body. The business and pressure of my work was actually where I felt happiest and even safe. Well, this foundation was fake. It couldn't carry the weight of life. I did finally go to see this great woman, a psychologist, and by talking to her, I learned 3 important rules to live by, my 3 foundations, which I would like to share with you today. Total acceptance. I had to realize for myself, what is the worst thing that can happen to you? What is the source of your struggle? What is your downside? Right, becoming ill again was my biggest fear, obviously. But by realizing and starting to believe that I could handle that, I had been cured 3 times before, this acceptance and belief slowly started to set me free. My second lesson, have courage. Face your problems and your demons. I finally learned to not to put my head in the sand anymore, to not be ashamed of my illness anymore, because the fears had only gotten bigger that way. They controlled my personality and my identity, and I lived in a lie for years. I learned to have the courage to accept and not fight and deny anymore that my broken places are part of me. And by seeing them as they are, by even embracing them, I became whole. And my last lesson, and this is my mantra, which I feel made me most successful in my work and life: listen to your true self, your instincts, your human personal intuition. Listen to the calling of your innermost self. It's very hard to hear sometimes, and it whispers more often than it shouts. But try to listen every day of your life, because at the core of any future worth pursuing has to be your truth, the one thing you believe in. And after all this, you may wonder, how did it go on? Well, in the end, I learned to listen to my innermost self. And I decided to put all this experience to good use. Today, quite frankly, is the ultimate but very scary way of doing that. I joined Kika. Kika is this relatively young but very successful charity in the Netherlands. And I do there what I can do best, helping, organizing, troubleshooting, raising funds. And this July I had the honor of becoming chair of Kika, which made me so proud. And when I was 32, a miracle happened. Against all odds and totally unexpected, my husband and I were surprised with the pregnancy with our son Oscar, followed by Olivia and Nikolai. The doctors could never explain these 3 pregnancies and beautiful babies. Despite my hormone levels, apparently my body had saved some golden eggs. Miracles sometimes do happen. And from the Hodgkin point of view, it's not a happy ever after story. 5 years ago, it did come back again. But as it turns out now, my kind of Hodgkin lymphoma is chronic, however, quite well treatable until now. And however hard to accept sometimes, I wouldn't change my experience anymore. I learned lessons that go far beyond surviving cancer. By living my life with my 3 rules to live by, I finally faced my demons. And I was able to build a strong foundation which gave my life value and direction in the ways I shared with you today. Thank you very much for letting me do that.